Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Women Who Rock with Success show, a digital media for professional and entrepreneurial women. Women are profiled on our digital platforms for branding and networking opportunities. To advertise on one of our shows, just go to our website at www.womenwhorockwithsuccess.com and submit a request on our advertising page. Did you know that we also report stories with top-notch media communications? Editors and reporters can submit credible and validated stories to our media source. Just go to www.topnotchmedia.org. Women Who Rock with Success continues to brand women and their profiles. Women Who Rock with Success is coming soon to Apple TV. You can also find us on Google Play, Roku TV, iHeartRadio, and other digital media sources. The show will begin in a moment with your host, Mrs. Diane Winbush.
Hey, good morning and welcome to Women Who Rock with Success. So today we have a special edition with Women Who Rock with Success. Of course, this is Saturday and not Tuesday morning. And we just want to be able to branch out into other fields to be able to discuss other topics that are important to women. So today we will be talking about policy and government. And so today in the studio we have none other than Miss Nayla Amaru. So let's get a little bit information about her. Over her 20-year career as an advocacy and policy strategist, Nayla Amaru has seamlessly navigated the broad political landscape from local neighborhoods to City Hall and Capitol Hill and strives vigilantly to create more meaningful connections between state and municipal governments and the diverse communities they serve. So that's just a little bit about her. And so we're going to bring her on now as we speak so we can get some more information about this woman's movement that she is doing in the policy and government field. So welcome to the show, Ms. Amaru.
Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. So with the description we just gave, we want you to be able to share with the listeners a little bit more in depth about what it is that you actually do in for the government and as far as, like an advocacy for Democrats.
Absolutely. So I'm essentially an advocacy and policy strategist, and I think it's important to go over my why before I go into what I do, of what my North Star is. I joined the Army 3 days after high school graduation, and I joined being an enlisted service member. I am a woman. I am a woman of color. And I'm very open and honest in terms of I'm very proud to have served my country. However, my experiences as a woman, as a person of color, and enlisted, exposed me to a lot of experiences of what it meant essentially to have no power, to be invisible, and what that meant for me and for people who share that same experience. And so it was because of my experiences in the military that I made a complete career change in terms of I was, really interested in journalism primarily, and then I pivoted to, maybe my experiences are taking me down a different life route. And so because of my experiences in the military, when I left the service, when I returned from Iraq, I went to college and I studied criminal justice, political science, essentially studying our formal power structures, and committed myself to not just my career, but to my life, to creating spaces to empower the very groups of people that felt like I had felt when I was in the military. And so with my new mission of how do I create spaces, how do I expand spaces to empower voices of people who have not been part of any power structures, has led me on a really interesting career. I started off as a grassroots organizer in Georgia. I have served as a Capitol Hill staffer in D.C. I have been a nonprofit consultant. I have been a registered lobbyist, a public interest registered lobbyist. I have worked on various components of the advocacy and policy spectrum, all of which have given me very unique insight insight into, one, how government works, how politics works, and how can everyday people who are not typically part of the policy-making process become part of the very decisions that impact their lives. And so my role as an advocacy and policy strategist is working in different ways, whether through grassroots organizations, whether through one-on-one leadership workshops that I conduct and organize. How can the very people, again, who are not part of the decision-making process when it comes to government decisions, when it comes to public policy, but are most impacted by those decisions, recognize the power that they have and invite them to become part of building systems and institutions and becoming part of the very process that they have typically not been a part of.
Oh, wow. That is a broad range of what you actually stand for, to try to be able to help to, it appears that you're closing the gaps or helping to close the gap for some, because a lot of times when it comes to politics and when it comes to laws and policy, sometimes even the color or the women of color or the people of color sometimes can be the ones that we may have to stand out a little bit more for, because of some things that sometimes we may not know, and so that is certainly powerful. So share with us a little bit, because I know by you being a woman and it's woman of color, I know that there had to be some challenges that had to come with that.
Absolutely. There's always layers to this, right? Because, particularly when we're talking about institutions for government, when we're talking about concepts of government, when we're talking about concepts of politics or power, historically, because of racism and patriarchy, that is best understood through the lens of, quite frankly, white men, right? And so you have institutions that are, who are primarily made of white men and understand issues and policies through the lived experience of being a white man, which is why it's so critical for people of color, and particularly women of color. We have such a different lived experience that provides so much value into the nuances of policy. And so I think particularly for me in my own journey, right, and it has been a journey, and in the spirit of authenticity, it is a journey I am still on, and I will be on for quite some time, just in the society that we live in. But again, when I walk into a room, I see it in every different iteration of my professional journey. When I was a Capitol Hill staffer, I would walk into the room, and people would wonder, like, well, why are you here? And the answer is because I deserve to be here. I have served my country. I have done my tour in Iraq. I survived. I came home. I have 2 master's degrees and 12 years experience under my belt. I deserve to be here. And I realized that for women, and particularly for women of color, there is always the demand for us to justify why we are in the space that we are in. And I've learned throughout my journey how I respond to that demand has changed, right? So when I was starting off and, trying to, build my resume and build my skills and, build my educational credentials, checking off all the boxes that society told me I needed to have in order for me to be in the positions that I was in, to justify why I was in the space that I was in, right? And I realized, as I checked off all the boxes that they demanded me to, it was still not enough. And I think that particularly for women of color in not just politics, but I think particularly for women of color who create and own their power, it is incredibly disorientating for people who may not understand how do you deal with a woman who truly understands that she deserves to be in this space. And so for me, when we're talking about challenges, that challenge has evolved in terms, the challenge is still there, right? Validating my existence and proving why I deserve to be in the room. The challenge will always be there. But how I responded to that challenge is what has evolved, as I personally have evolved and grown into the comfort of really owning my experiences and my expertise separate from the boxes that society has expected me to check, because I've checked them all, and you're still questioning why I'm in these rooms. And so I think the challenges, again, are particularly for women of color in institutions that are male-dominated, of constantly having to prove why you're there and why you deserve to be in those spaces.
Absolutely, because I don't even want to get into that arena and things, but sometimes when it comes to women, women sometimes will take the back seat. So after, I think we went over to one of your films that we had saw, online. The first thing that came to me that you were determined in what it is that you have in order to be able to pursue to help others in areas of politics and government, and that is an awesome thing to be able to do, because if someone says, no, you don't belong in this room, and you still continue to go in there, and that's the way it's supposed to be, because we do not supposed to take down just because we're women or because of our ethnic background. That is a powerful statement. So tell us a little bit about what areas do you serve? I know it's nonprofits, and I know it's government and campaigns. So would you touch on three of those components as to how what you do is beneficial for those to be able to help them to be able to understand? Because, so take for instance, like individuals, and this is what I have tried to get people to understand in the past. It's not about the color of who you vote for. You got to look at the person when they're having their campaigns. You got to see what they stand for. You got to see what they are pushing for, what they're lobbying for, what their rights are. And so some individuals just do not know that, especially, now I'm going to be honest, the state of Mississippi has a lot of growing up to do, because there is not enough information being pushed to these individuals. I know we're supposed to get up, which I'm not in the state of Mississippi, but when I say we, that means all of us. I know we're supposed to get up and go get our information and things like that, but some people just really just don't know. And so is the nonprofit area, tell us a little bit about that, and then we want you to touch on the government for us, the city, state, and federal, and then we want you to be able to touch on what you do to be able to help and impact others through your campaigns and electoral movements that you have.
Absolutely. So for the nonprofit side, it's essentially through two different lenses that I work with nonprofits. One is program evaluation. So there are a few different types of nonprofits. You have your direct service nonprofits. You have your think tank nonprofits who do research and policy analysis. And I primarily work with your direct service nonprofits, the nonprofits that are in their local neighborhoods that are providing much-needed services to our neighbors or to ourselves. And so for nonprofits to receive funding, whether from foundations or whether from government, they need to essentially prove that they're doing the work that they're getting funding for. And so, one of my key services that I work with for nonprofits is essentially program evaluations, which is basically the process to make sure that we are identifying the correct metrics, the correct benchmarks, and making sure that you are, in fact, making the impact that you are saying that you are making or that you are trying to make, making adjustments as necessary so that we are moving your nonprofit organization towards fulfilling its mission, whatever it may be. The other side with nonprofits that are more C4 related, and that means basically that a nonprofit that's C4 is that they can engage in some political activity, whereas a 501c3 has severe, strict limitations, and so a lot of C3 nonprofits just don't, engage with politics at all, which certainly has its consequences as well, because if you're a nonprofit and you're not engaging in politics or in the policy process, then some really important decisions are being made about your constituents and about your programming without you being in the room. So for the nonprofits that want to be in the room, they have a C4 status, which allows them to do a little bit of lobbying with some parameters. And with those nonprofits, I work with them on budget and legislative issues, again, because those are nonprofits that do engage directly in political activity. And so I use the relationships that I have with legislators across the country. I've worked in politics in quite a few states and for quite some time. So basically using the relationships that I've built with over the past 2 decades with elected officials to bring nonprofits into the room and to help them, again, begin and continue these conversations when it comes to budget and to legislative decisions. When it comes to government, I have worked at the state, federal, and municipal level of government, primarily as a staffer or as a program manager or as a lobbyist. I was a lobbyist at the state level when I was in Georgia, and I've been a state government employee at the city and federal level when I worked for municipal government in Georgia. And here in New York, when I was the executive director for the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus here in New York City. And in those various capacities, I was a direct line into shaping policy with the very people who introduced the laws and helped facilitate the process of, how do we make sure that this bill that's being introduced does not die in committee, where a lot of bills go to die. A lot of bills are introduced, but very, very few bills actually make it into law because it's a very long and can be a very complicated process. And so when I'm wearing my government hat as a staffer or working with legislators or as a lobbyist, being an integral part of shaping the policies and making sure that it is as equitable as possible, that we are really understanding the nuances of different impacts a particular piece of policy can have, depending on the community, because it's really important to note, particularly when we're talking about cities, as diverse as New York City, that a particular piece of policy may seem like a great idea, but when you really look at how does this impact different communities and how it can impact communities very differently, it's important to have that perspective of those particular nuances as part of the conversation, which, again, why diversity in government and why diversity of people who are in the room talking about these policies is so important. On the campaign side, I have worked electoral campaigns, again, at every level of government, from field organizer, fundraiser, strategist, consultants. And my role when I'm working electoral campaigns is essentially to get good people in government. And so I'm going to answer that through 2 different lenses, because you also talked about, when it comes to campaigns as a citizen, what should we consider when it comes to who we should vote for.
Sure.
I think it's important, one, democracy, right? However we choose to live into that and to lean into it as our power as at the voting booth. Some folks will vote for someone because they look like them. Some folks will vote for someone because they're a man or a woman. And to each their own. Democracy is, again, whatever representative democracy means to you, we have the right to exercise it as we so choose. However, I can tell you, after 2 decades in this business, all your kinfolk ain't your kinfolk. And it's really important to understand that representative democracy, you can have someone who looks like you in office, but that does not necessarily mean that they are representing your best interest. And that's been the more painful, I think, realization of being a woman of color in politics, is that we almost have this built-in expectation that if you look like us, if you come from our community, whatever your community may be, that there's this expectation that you will be representative of that particular community. With that said, everyone has an opportunity to decide how they choose their candidates. I know some of the things that I think through when I'm going through this process of, when people are running for various offices and are asking for my vote, is number one, what's most important to me is, do they share my same values? Before we even talk about, specific policies or polling or, who has the best campaign commercials, at the end of the day, right, at the end of the day, do we share the same values? Because if the answer is no, then that tells me everything I need to know in terms of where I can and cannot support you. But if we do share the same values, then that is an opportunity for me to learn more and explore more about how does this candidate and what has this candidate done before running for office? What have they done in their body of work, professionally and personally, that exemplifies that this is a value that they live? Because anybody can come out and say, I believe in A, B, and C, and that's great for talking points and for a soundbite for a radio bit. But how do you live into this value that you claim that you have? So that's like my number one thing of like, do we share the same values? And two, what have you done to show that these are values that you live by? And then, the other two parts that I look at too, for me personally, for candidates that I take into consideration are leadership experiences and skill sets. Leadership experience, and I think it's really important to note, particularly for women and people of color who throw their hat into the political ring. I'm not talking about were you executive director of an organization or a CEO. I'm not talking about that type of leadership because that's just a title, right? Anybody can have a title with the right connections, right? I'm talking about leadership. Have you and when have you taken the initiative to solve a problem in your community? What have you done previously before running for office that shows that you are the type of person that does more than just saying, here's a problem, and you are the type of person to be, I'm the solution to that problem and working towards it, right? So for me, that's leadership. It's taking the initiative. It's being able to identify problems and solving them. And the last thing I look for is skill sets. I've seen it many a time. You have a lot of good people who are really excited to run for office and they get elected. And they have a great platform. They have the best ideas and they mean well, but they do not have the networks or the skill sets to transition from ideas into actual implementation. And that's also really important to me, that you have that balance of, do you know how to build coalitions? And this is also coming from my experience as an organizer of, again, you can have great talking points and you can have great ideas, but do you have the ability to be able to assess when you walk into your chambers and you're trying to whip votes to support your ideas for your bill once it's been introduced? Do you have the understanding of how to navigate the political process? And that doesn't necessarily have to come from like years in government. That's just an understanding of how people work, right? And like being able to identify who are your allies and who are not. How do you neutralize the people who could be troublesome to what you're trying to do? And how do you build and deepen real partnerships with the people who could be supportive in what you're trying to do? So for me, the long answer to your question is, for me, again, I look for values. Do we share them? How have you lived your values? Do you have leadership experience? Again, not based off of titles, because again, anybody can have a title, but how have you taken the initiative to really take a leadership role in your community to try and solve the problems that impact and are a concern to you? And lastly, again, do you have the skill to transition from big vision to tactical operations of breathing life into what you want to have happen for your community?
Absolutely. Very well thought out and stated, because that is very important. And I think it was when another president was running for office, and which it was former President Barack Obama, and so it was a local mayor of the same color had made a statement on the news, and you have to go to the polls for the value, not the color. It's not a person. Sometimes a person can be of African American or of the same descent, and they can still not have the same values or the same ethics that the individual is going to the poll for. So that is very, very well descriptive and stated as to how you brought that forth. So share with us a little bit about the difference between, because sometimes we get it confused. All of us does, all of us have, and all of us do. The difference between Democrats and Republicans, because sometimes people feel that, well, a Republican, he's not for the poor, and the Democrat is for the poor. But it's a little bit more in depth than that. Then it's just, I'm standing for this one because they're going to help me get my medicine, cheaper or what have you and things. It's not about that. It's basically about what it's actually all about, what it stands for, and how it can be defined. So if you would share with us the difference between the Democrat role and what the Republican role actually means.
Absolutely. So there are three different lenses that I'll answer that question, because you're right, it gets complicated because of history, right? So Democrats and Republicans have done a lot of flip-flopping since even before our Constitution was crafted. And that lends to like the confusion, right? So oftentimes people hear, well, the Republican Party was the party that freed the slaves, which is true, right? Historically, that is true. However, the platform of the Republican Party has certainly changed, right? So I think first and foremost, I think it's important to understand that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have evolved and gone through significant changes in terms of their platforms and their philosophies, roughly 6 to 7 times throughout history. I won't go into all the different 6 or 7 waves. Your listeners are free to research that on their own. But I think it's important to note that the parties have, in fact, gone through a lot of evolution since the beginning of our country, which lends to, again, that narrative of the Democrats were the ones who fought for slavery and the Republicans free slavery. There is an element of truth to that, but it's not the whole truth. So I would just want to start and frame the conversation with that. The other 2 things I would say that differentiate Republicans and Democrats is, number one, philosophy, right? So Democrats and Republicans have very different orientations of what they believe the role of government should be. Democrats believe in more of a central, more government, right? Because they believe that government should be the provider for social services, to help, support social structures. Democrats, generally speaking, believe that government should have a big role in people's lives, right? Republicans, on the other hand, are advocates for limited government. They don't want government at all, for the most part, right? They think that government should be very limited in how it, plays and shows up in people's lives. So that's when it comes to philosophy, that's the big difference. Democrats want big government, Republicans want limited government. And the impact that has shows up in the policies, right? So Democrats, when it comes to policies, oftentimes want to have more social welfare policies, right? Whereas Republicans are always the ones when they're in office, are trying to cut the funding to a lot of social programs because that's not their philosophy. But they don't want government to fund those. Republicans believe that government should fund our military and foreign affairs, right? So it's just a different shift of where both parties, what they believe the role of government is and what government should actually fund. The other part is interesting, particularly in an America that is becoming more brown and becoming more young, is geography and demographics. The Democratic Party, for the most part, is incredibly strong in urban centers, in our urban cities. It's pretty normal to, your bigger American cities tend to be Democratic, and they tend to also be on the coast. And also tends to be much more diverse in terms of, who identifies as a Democrat, whereas Republicans tend to dominate more of the rural areas and also tend to be, quite frankly, more white. And so when it comes to what are the differences between Democrats and Republicans, again, I think it's important to understand, one, the history, right, because there's been a lot of flip-flopping throughout history.
Right.
Two, they have two very different frameworks of what they believe the government should do for the lives of everyday people. Again, Democrats believe in big government, more roles from government to support people. Republicans believe in limited government. And when it comes to geography and demographics, occupy very different parts of our country and also have very different demographics when it comes to who identifies as a Republican and who identifies as a Democrat.
Wow, that's very powerful. Another statement or question that has been very, very detailed and descriptive. So we're going to shift gears, still talking about policies, still talking about government, but it's two other components that I guess we want to be able to touch on so individuals can be able to get a more understanding and your perspective, because you're the guest or you're the expert in this area. So we have a lot of issues that are going on right now. Two of them. One, it's with, of course, Nancy Pelosi, and she is trying to impeach the government, and this is not nothing or anything in regards to the broadcast. We're trying to find fault or anything like that, but as a woman in her position as a Democrat and what have you, it's a lot of controversy that is stirring up in regards to the impeachment as a woman, and so there are some other issues that have arose that I do want you to touch if we have the time to be able to do that. And so one of them is I want you to be able to speak with the listeners in regards to a little bit experience as when Hillary Clinton was running for president. Tell us a little bit about that as how you were effective in delegating and going out to be basically like a forerunner for her. And then the next topic that we're going to touch on after that is in regards to what is going on with the Hispanic world in the United States, simply because of the fact that the Hispanics have been over here for centuries on top of centuries. And so now all of a sudden it has become an issue. Some of the things that I'm not even, I'm trying to figure out where did this start at as to how they come into cages and all these things like that. Because, see, years ago I used to work for a correctional facility, so it's always been somewhat of a bias and a prejudice towards Hispanics when they are incarcerated. So, number one, I want you to touch on some experiences that you have had as a delegate while Hillary Clinton was running, and then we want to touch on some things because sometimes, look, Nayla, sometimes we can all have political arenas, and the answer sometimes can be right there in our face. What can we do to kind of stop this and things, especially if people are trying to come to the United States for better quality, better food, better living arrangements, better cleaning water, and things like that. Some people just want better things. And so we want to hit on that question second, but we want to hit on you as a delegate for Hillary Clinton first.
Yes. So I was a delegate for Hillary Clinton for the 2016 Democratic National Convention. And I think my experiences, full disclosure, I had always been a supporter of Hillary Clinton. I was a supporter for her in her first run for president in 2008 and was really excited to see her throw her hat back in the ring for 2016 and was really excited to be part of the formal process. So I think I'll answer that through two different lenses as well.
Okay.
One, I think the importance of what it meant, like what does it mean when a woman runs for president of the United States, right? So I think that frames, at least for me, I guess the rest of the conversation. So as a woman, and particularly as a person of color, again, working in politics for as long as I have, and for other women of color who work in any male-dominated spaces, it is an unfortunate truth that we all have stories to share. And those stories are often rooted in sexism, racism, misogyny, right, an intersection of how our identities collide with the dominant worldview, and how often we as women, as people of color, particularly for women of color, how we are left to fight these battles, oftentimes what it feels like alone. And so when Hillary threw her hat in the ring, you're talking about a woman who has been, whether you love or whether you hate her, we have to acknowledge that this is a woman who has been in the media glare for 30 years and has sustained 30 years of conservative attacks. That stem back to 1992 when she basically said that, she wasn't a lawyer to bake cookies, which, infuriated so many people because how dare she actually practice law. But I think that speaks to, a core issue of society, which is gender roles, and which are very much rooted in patriarchy, right? I mean, you have a woman who went to our nation's top law school, and she didn't give up her entire career, to bake cookies and to become a housewife. And so she challenged that social norm, and people resented her for it. And so with that said, my experience, and like one of the reasons why I have, been a supporter of her and continue to support her, has been because I know through my lived experiences, I know in a very deeply painful way what it means to fight patriarchy, and also as a woman of color, what it means to fight racism as well. And so I think for me, my experiences representing her in her campaign and the honor of being a delegate is wrapped up in the understanding of you have the first high-profile woman, and that's not to take away from Shirley Chisholm, who's the first Black woman to run for president. And we've had Victoria back in, I think it was 1850s, I believe it was, who was the first one to run for president on a third-party line. But for Hillary Clinton to run for president and to be the nominee for one of our first two major parties is history making, but was also made possible by the previous woman who ran as well. So I think it's important to pay homage to the ones who threw their hat in the ring first. With that said, I think that Hillary running for president opened the doors for us having this last election cycle, 6 women running for president. Again, progress happens. Sometimes it's linear and sometimes it's not. But however progress comes, no one can deny the impact that her previous presidential runs had as it relates to, I remember in 2016, when she was debating Trump, where like everything was through a gender lens, right? What is she wearing? Did she change the color of her hair? Is the shade of her lipstick different? Has she gained weight? Has she lost weight? Everything was so focused on that gender lens of women were supposed to be beautiful in the public eye, right? Because that's what is expected for women. Whereas this campaign cycle, of course, because sexism is everywhere, there were certainly articles and outtakes for media discussing the physical appearances of our women candidates. But by and large, because there were so many of them, it was not so hyper-focused on one. So, like, we're not talking about what brand shoe a candidate was wearing because she was a woman, but this time we're actually talking about her policies, right, which I think is a huge which is a direct impact of Hillary Clinton's run, because now it's not an anomaly having a woman run for president. It's and I think that next cycle, whoever wins, we'll have more and more women of color, and not just, through the race binary, but also more identities represented. New Americans, LGBTQ plus people, maybe formerly incarcerated. There are so many different lived experiences that are part of the American experience that have yet to be represented politically, let alone on a national scale. And those lived experiences are so important because our identities frame the lives that we live. It impacts how we view ourselves and how other people view us. And that has a very clear impact and consequence of how we understand public policies. And so I think diversity in our political leadership pipeline is so important because in America we are so diverse. Our political representation needs to be just as diverse as the American people so that we can really begin to think about old problems in a new way, and that comes from having a diverse group of candidates running for public office.
Okay. Well stated. That is, with Hillary Clinton and when her husband was president, it seems like everything was it fit into place. Everything, whether it was food, merchandise, whether it was expenses, everything appeared to kind of fit in place with him. So I just wanted to touch on that topic because I felt that she would have been a great president. It is so deplorable that just her making one mistake, or they found one mistake on her regarding those emails. That was just totally ridiculous to come in there and combat her character, as that. So I was kind of a little hurt. I felt that was going to hurt her credibility, even as well as a woman. But from what her husband has put forth as a president, I'm pretty sure she would have done the same thing as double that if she would have won, the election. So we want to be able to shift gears and talk about some more things because sometimes as I stated before, sometimes answers can be right there in front of us, and sometimes individuals will have to lobby in order to get the legislation to be able to listen to certain policies and things that people are trying to state, because my perception of the outcry for the Hispanics, my thing was let them come over, take the whatever that is, the border wall. I understand all of that. I know somebody's going to have to fund all of this if we let 700 or 70,000 or 80,000 come over, but it seems like to me that a lucrative type of strategy and plan should have been put in place for the Hispanics so they can be able to come over or navigate over in a certain period of time. We're going to process you all in. We're going to help you to get a job. And then after we get through doing that, then we'll let some more come over. Because the United States is one of the richest countries, or the richest country, in the world. And so that's the reason why sometimes I do sympathize with, Hispanic, Latinos, whoever that is trying to come over, and they're trying to make a better living. So why do you feel, in your terms, the reason why we're not combating that? Why are we not sitting at the round table trying to figure out how can we resolve this so they can be happy, they can be at peace, and then we can be able to be resourceful to them as well, and then everybody can go home, with, I guess, happily ever after. So why do you think that the Republicans, I want to say that they are the ones that is pushing against this? Now, some of the things that they do make mention, it does make sense. I do agree with them, but I still feel that there is something that can be put in place as a process. It can't happen all at once, 70,000 or 80,000 come over at once, but I think that if we put our heads together, we could be able to come up with something to be able to process this little by little, and then that way we can have, because everybody is not bad. It's a lot of people over here in the United States does things too, just like Mexico, Honduras, all of them. And so why do you think that there is a strenuous issue through the Republican platform as to why they're pushing all of this back?
So the simple answer is American racism. And so I'm going to explain what that means and how that impacts the policy narrative. ultimately at the end of the day, the immigration debate, it can be really complicated because there are so many different moving parts to it. But at the end of the day, the main narrative that you hear because of American nationalism, if you will, is us versus them, right? It's us Americans versus them the immigrants, them being Latinos, right? And I do think it's important to note that immigrants come from every nation, but by and large, the media focus has been on immigrants from Mexico. I think that when we simplify a really complicated issue in a very complicated process to a very simple narrative, what we're losing out on is a real meaningful discussion of what needs to change and how we can change it together, right? And so with that said, I also think it's important that when we're talking about American history, oftentimes, and I say this as someone who used to live in Texas, I went to undergrad in Texas and lived there for a few years, it exposed me, I think, to the immigration debate up close and personal in a way that I had not been exposed to before. And also, and I mentioned that because of history, right? So when you hear, conservative talking points or talking points on TV talking about, in particular for them, it's, the Mexican immigrants are coming over, they're taking over, this is our country. When really, half of America used to be Mexico, but America broke its promise in the Treaty of Hidalgo. So let's have that conversation of, who is in whose country and who should go back, right? So I think it's important to recognize history, that half of America, in fact, used to be Mexico but it's not because of broken treaties. With that said, going back to my earlier point, when you simplify a really complicated process to a very simple narrative of us versus them, you are losing out again on creating space to connect people from opposing views to come together and really think through what's the problem, right? Because if the argument is, they should, they're coming over and they're taking away American jobs, which is their number one talking point, right?
Oh, okay.
Despite that has been proven time and time again to simply not be true. So either you find a new talking point, or if your whole basis of your argument for not wanting to revisit immigration or to start talking about immigration reform and what that looks like today, then really what you're holding on to is your belief that a group that's different from yours is taking something away to something that you feel you're entitled to, which you're not. And that is the very crux, again, of how American racism works and how it shows up in our policies. Again, a very complicated issue. My frustration with the whole immigration conversation has been that it's been simplified to such a simple narrative, when in fact immigration, that comes from all sorts of countries, people from all over the world. But the vitriol is particularly focused on immigrants from Mexico, which again is very much rooted in racism. Telling Mexican immigrants to go back to where they came from, again, when half of America used to be Mexico. So I think through that lens, in full disclosure, I'm not up to par with all the intricacies of the immigration conversations and policies, but I do know, as someone who has just learned and is involved and engaged in concerns and wants immigration reform, and supports pathways to citizenship. Again, my frustration has been a very simplified narrative on a very difficult process and complicated issue simplifies it to us versus them. And when you frame conversations in that way, nobody wins.
Absolutely, absolutely. I must absolutely agree with that. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I would love for you to share with the listeners, if you will, how they can be able to follow you, any upcoming campaigns that you have, that you are delegating behind, any political official, or any books that you have written. You can share that or if you want to be able to share something with them as how they can be able to follow you on any social media platforms. You can do that at this time.
Oh, thank you so much. So I am here, I'm there, I'm everywhere. Wherever there's an issue camp for me to build on, there's a good chance I'm there. So with that said, I do a lot of travel, but there are two ways that you can connect with me. I am on Twitter, so feel free to follow me at my name, Nailah Amaru. That's NAILAH. So feel free to follow me. I typically tweet my political thoughts, which are my own independent thoughts. I share news articles, love to stay connected with people, and have some real meaningful exchange. And another way that you can follow me and stay connected with me is I am a contributing writer to an online blog called Brown Girl's Guide to Politics. So if you are ever interested in exploring politics, if you are a woman of color, if you're just, interested in politics, I write articles based off of my own hard-earned lived lessons about being a woman of color in these spaces. So feel free, again, to follow me on Twitter. And again, I share out through Twitter my blogs on Brown Girl's Guide to Politics, on how to enter politics with purpose.
Absolutely. We have had an exceptional day today with this great, powerful woman that is trying to mend and bridge the gap for people like you and I. She's a forerunner for us, and so we're so thankful that you took out the opportunity over your busy schedule to be our guest on the weekend with Women Who Rock with Success. And so, women, you have gained a lot of resources in the policy and government area, and we applaud her for what she has already done and what she is advocating for nonprofits, for campaigning, for delegates in the near future. For all upcoming events, you can be able to go to our website at www.womenwhorockwithsuccess.com. You will find there different tools and resources, other individuals that have been on our podcast, and the next upcoming guest. So until next time, first of all, thank you, Nailah, for being our guest today.
Thank you so much.
And we will see you all on Tuesday morning sharp at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time. Women Who Rock with Success is hosted by Ms. Diane Winbush, who is the publisher and the chief editor of Women Who Rock with Success. We thank you for your time for our broadcast on today. We also are an affiliate of Girls Who Rock with Success and the National Extraordinary Professional Women.